Time has passed faster than normal, it seems, so let me tell you about the games I played in October. A lot of my time throughout the month was spent playing Hades 2, and my goodness, does Supergiant know how to make your brain go brr. To be honest, I was a bit surprised when I first heard that they were making a new Hades game, as that hasn't really been the studio's MO. Sure, you can see similarities between every title they've put out, but they've never done a game that treads the exact same ground as the one before it, and Hades 2 very much treads the same ground as the one before it. Sometimes literally. It is more Hades, and like a lot more Hades. The sheer scope of content is a bit staggering, and what's amazing is that so much of the new stuff, from the levels to the weapons to the upgrades, are incredibly engaging from a mechanical standpoint. Melenui's ability to charge attacks creates a new layer to the combat and opens up the potential for different playstyles that can be elevated by the wide variety of boons, allowing the game to provide the sought-after roguelite sensation of every run feeling distinct. They increased the scale of Hades in every way imaginable, and with almost every aspect, they met the demands of that increased scale beautifully. Now, unfortunately, despite almost every aspect of the game feeling incredible, there is one significant area that kind of collapsed under its scale, making the experience as a whole feel pretty messy, that being its narrative. Where Hades 1 is a fairly small story of family drama, Hades 2 expands into something a lot bigger. It's still kind of a family drama, but a much more complicated to examine type of family drama. One about family members who don't really know each other and continue to not really know each other as the drama unfolds, and so the relationships between the central characters end up feeling fairly stilted and harder to connect with. I'm sure you've heard some of this before. The story has been a sticking point for a lot of people, so much so that Supergiant patched the ending, which, I don't know, is very interesting. I played the majority of the game pre-patch, but it did kick in before my final run, so I ended up seeing the changed ending, which honestly wasn't ideal because I missed the build-up they added, so it still felt weird. In some ways, I do appreciate that they made shifts based on community feedback. Even though it happened post-release, this is the sort of ethos you'd expect from a company who relies so much on early access. If they take feedback on gameplay systems, why wouldn't they take feedback on the story as well? However, it does feel weird to just have the ending of the game changed. And while I personally find what they changed it to be a decent enough way to wrap things up, it is still a fairly messy story that doesn't develop Melenui or any of the other characters really in ways that feel all that notable. That's not to say there's nothing interesting about them, it just doesn't all come together in the way it did with Hades. And so, despite it having so many gameplay aspects that I found to be far more compelling than anything in Hades, something is lost due to the fact that all of its parts don't coalesce. In Hades 1, I felt motivated every single run, even after rolling credits, to uncover a little bit more of the story, to watch Zagreus' relationship develop with the entire cast, and this coincided with the desire to experiment with new builds and crank the heat up to give myself a new challenge. Hades 2 though lacks that same pull. That's not to say it isn't there at all. For a good while I felt intrigued by the mission and endeared by the camaraderie of the unseen, but that intrigue and endearment faded faster than I had hoped it would. So even though there is a ton for me to do post credits, I haven't felt the same drive to go back in the way I did with Hades, because even though there is so much more to the game, less of it is working together to keep pulling me back in. Now, to be clear, this game is still one of the easiest recommendations I can think of, especially if you haven't played Hades 1. It's really fun and does a ton of cool stuff. It just ends up feeling a bit less than the sum of its parts, which takes it from being a potential all-timer to just a really good game. I also played Absolum, a co-op roguelite beat-em-up that I enjoyed a fair bit. Its presentation is striking. The hand-drawn art style and smooth animations make it feel like playing a cartoon, and so whenever I pulled off a slick combo, I not only felt good about playing well, but I'd also be in awe of how cool it looked on screen. It is not uncommon for games to have incredible character animations, however, I do find that my brain glosses over them in a lot of cases. It sees them just as flourishes instead of part of the whole, but that was not the case with Absolum. Its visuals demanded my attention in a way not all games do, and certainly was a driving factor in getting me to want to see more and more of the game. I'm positive someone has combined a roguelite with a beat 'em up before, but this is the first one I've really played, and it's a super fitting combination, as it allows it to feel reminiscent of older arcade beat 'em up experiences without the same amount of frustration that comes from having to start a game from the beginning again after running out of continues, as is common in the genre, the meta progression softens every failure, and the variety in terms of abilities as well as paths to the end, of which there are many, always keeps things fresh. While the abilities gained throughout any given run certainly will influence playstyle, I still felt like I always had to stick to certain fundamentals and execute them efficiently, which I appreciated because in a lot of roguelites, once you get a certain number of power-ups, it can slip into the run sort of plane itself, but that never really happened to me in Absolum. I do think the meta progression ramps up in a weird way. Obviously, most roguelites with meta progression are designed in a way where it will be nearly impossible to complete a run until permanently upgrading your character a certain amount, but the fact that that's the case feels almost too obvious here. It kind of feels like the game starts you further back than it maybe should have in terms of starting abilities, and so you sort of just have to fail through a couple runs before getting to see the cooler ideas the game has to offer. I suppose this does push players to get some practice in with the basic combat before complicating it all with extra abilities, but also I found myself asking multiple times why some things weren't just unlocked from the start. Thankfully, it doesn't take that long to access the more interesting parts of the game, but it certainly does make the pacing of those early hours feel a bit off, and it makes it a little too clear that you're doing better because your character is stronger and not because you are getting more skilled. Despite all that, once it hits its stride, it offers a challenging and deep system with tons of worthwhile secrets to find and fights to best, and I've already told like 4 friends that I want to play through it with them, so it is a game I expect to be coming back to for a good long while. That's all I've got. Roguelite month is over. Not really. I play too many roguelites now. What happened to me? Doesn't matter. I'll see you in the next one unless I decide to stop doing this.